Good morning, friends. Welcome to worship with Pittsburgh Mennonite Church, Cyber Edition. I know we would rather be meeting in person, but technology does afford us some opportunities. For instance, how else could I invite all of you to my back porch, which is basically a fire escape? But it seemed fitting to be outdoors on the commemoration of Earth Day. So to begin, we have the gathering from Sing the Journey, number 120. Come, let us seek rest at the altar of God, where even the infant can find comfort and protection, where even the weak can find justice and peace. Blessed are those who dwell in God's presence, where even the lily may grow in glory, where even the grass may be clothed with life. Blessed are those who trust in you, O God, our home and our provider. Now is the time for us to light a peace lamp or candle, whatever you have at home. The wind has picked up a little bit, so hopefully this take will be effective. I think of the growers of our food, everyone who has been involved in that process and historically have been undervalued for their contribution in that work. I'm going to read from Sing the Journey again, number 141. Creating God, for those who are wise to the ways of your earth, thank you. For those who listen to the language of tree, rock, river, earth, ocean, stars, creatures, sky, praise. Teach us the vocabulary to convey our care, the words to tell the earth we hear her crying for peace, the syllables of solace for all we have lost, the gestures of healing for all we have harmed. No doubt about it, we are in a chaotic time, but life is all about perspective and seizing opportunities. During this, the great pause, as I've heard it called, I've been noticing more in the earth's return to life. Maybe you have too. In previous years, many of us have been too busy to take as much notice. In a previous year, there would have been too much traffic down this cobbled street at rush hour for me to even share this space with you. That rush. How do we want to emerge from this time at home? I've been listening to an interview by Krista Tippett called On Being. Many thanks to Paula for recommending that podcast to me years ago, and I relay that recommendation on to all of you. Her guest was Joanna Macy, who has studied the poetry of Rainer Maria Rilke, and Joanna has developed the framework of the work that reconnects. And I love their visual of a spiral. We'll show it in a bit, which takes us through gratitude, honoring our pain, seeing with new eyes, and going forth. May this service be a blessing to you in that process. You might notice that I've added another visual. This was a gift from my mother years ago that has the Ecclesiastes verse on it. To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. In this time of more time outdoors, I have been taking some lessons from plants, one of which, slightly controversial dandelion. As I put them in this vase, I thought of you, Karen Swanson. Tried to arrange them a little bit with some intention. So parts of the dandelion are edible, maybe all of it's edible, I'm not sure. But this year, partly in honor of my 96-year-old grandma, I took a stab at cooking up the greens. And the lesson I took from that is that they are bitter. It takes processing them. They need to be blanched and seasoned. And brings me once more to my curiosity of what we will do with this bitter time. How it will change us, how it will help us grow.
Seeds gathered and sown, wheat gathered and grown, bread broken and shared as one, the living bread of God. Thy fruit
I will be reading from Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, 7 to 9, and 15 from the Inclusive Bible. Thus the heavens and the earth and all their array were completed. On the seventh day, God had finished all the work of creation, and so on that seventh day, God rested. God blessed the seventh day and called it sacred, because on it, God rested from all the work of creation. So the Eternal fashioned an earth creature out of the clay of the earth and blew into its nostrils the breath of life. And the earth creature was a living being. The Eternal planted the east in Eden, land of pleasure, and placed in it every kind of tree, enticing to look at and good to eat, to spring up from the soil. In the center of the garden was the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Then the Eternal took the earth creature and settled it in the Garden of Eden so that it might cultivate and care for the land.
Recycling doesn't work. Recycling doesn't work. Boo hiss, recycling doesn't work. Whoa, what's going on here? Pardon me, child, but what are you doing? Most recycling bins are a hoax. Most recycling bins are a hoax. Boo hiss, most recycling bins are a hoax. Oh my goodness, children, whoa. Don't you know it's Earth Day? What in the world are you doing? Recycling is more economically complicated than most people realize. Recycling is way more economically complicated than most people realize. Oh my goodness, children, you're supposed to be the future. How in the world did you get so jaded and pessimistic? Well, for me, it all started with a Bring Your Daughter to Work day when I realized, after talking with the custodial staff, that more often than not, those recycle bins, even if they're separate, they just go to the same place as all the other trash. Yeah, the sad reality is that most corporate offices haven't negotiated contracts with their waste company that allow them to really accurately account for the quantity of recyclables that the building's tenants want to do. So it just gets thrown out anyway. Plus, we can't even recycle clamshells anymore! Yes, recycled materials are subject to the same laws of supply and demand as everything else. There's just too much plastic, more than we could ever have a meaningful use for. Well, this is a huge bummer to hear. I'm sorry to break it to you, old man, but it's just the truth. Recycling doesn't really work. Please, call me Bernie. Bernie Sanders, actually. No relation. No relation to who? Oh, that's right, your kids. All right, well, where do I make my sign? I'm ready to join the circle of despair. Yay! Hey guys, what's going on here? Oh, we're just spreading the news on Earth Day that recycling doesn't really work and nothing we do matters and the planet is doomed for destruction. Whoa, it sounds to me like you kids need a pep talk, a solid work ethic. Not all of you have even bothered to make signs. and a new understanding of the role that recycling plays in society, socially and environmentally speaking. Okay, boomer. I'm not sure you understand how that expression works. No, he's right. I'm 18 years old, and for a lemur, that's basically ancient. You can internet it. He's not wrong. Also, my name is Boomer. See, I view recycling kind of the same way I view prayer, my favorite spiritual discipline. Prayer is really for me, not for God, just like recycling is kind of for me. I don't understand. Are you saying you recycle even though you already know it doesn't do anything? Well, first of all, it does do some things. It does help keep some of our waste out of the landfill. But secondly, God doesn't need me to pray in order to be aware of the problem or powerful enough to solve it. Prayer is for me to focus my energy on the positive belief that a solution exists and to summon the courage it will take to work toward a solution instead of wallowing in the problem. When I pray, my faith is renewed. The connection I feel to God gives me new energy to problem solve, be gracious and patient while God works behind the scenes. If I don't pray, I lose focus, and I may not notice when answers to prayer are coming. If I don't pray, I may get more focused on the problem than the solution. Recycling is kind of like that. I know that my one act of recycling doesn't reverse climate change, but it's a gesture of my intention to join with the millions of others who are working together to protect each other and the planet. Collectively, we can make a stronger difference. Also, my commitment to recycling and my understanding of its shortcomings makes me more aware of my voting and purchasing decisions. For example, I don't buy plastic water bottles and bring a reusable water bottle to work instead. Just like I don't count on prayer to be the only thing I do in response to a problem I'm having, I also don't count on recycling to be my only environmental initiative. Have you kids ever heard the saying, reduce, reuse, recycle? No, but that sounds like really helpful advice. What was it again? Reduce, reuse, recycle. Ah, yes. Reduce, reuse, recycle. I can't believe I forgot. Why, back in my day, we prioritized all three of those things. Back in my day, we didn't have all these modern conveniences of recycling pickup. Okay, Boomer. No, it's Bernie. Okay, Boomer. It sounds like that list, reduce, reuse, recycle, might be listed in a hierarchy of importance. Reduce the amount of single-use items or recyclable materials we purchase anyways. Then we can look for ways to reuse as much as possible. Like when my mom uses Ollie bags to pick up my dog's poop. Why does she use Ollie bags? Literally any other bag is easier for picking up dog poop. Regardless, number 3 is recycle. It's the last resort after we've attempted to use less and reuse whatever we can. Exactly! What a smart group of kids. I don't know about you, but I feel like a new chant is coming on. Yay! Take a more holistic approach to environmentalism. Take a more holistic approach to environmentalism. Boo hiss, boo hiss. Take a more holistic approach to environmentalism. Happy birthday, kids!
Peter stood up, and backed by the other 11, spoke out with bold urgency. Fellow Israelites, listen carefully to these words. Jesus the Nazarene, a man thoroughly accredited by God to you, the miracles and wonders and signs that God did through him are common knowledge. This Jesus followed the deliberate and well-thought-out plan of God, was betrayed by men who took the law into their own hands, and was handed over to you. And you pinned him to a cross and killed him. But God untied the death ropes and raised him up. Death was no match for him. David said it all. I saw God before me for all time. Nothing can shake me. He's right by my side. I'm glad from the inside out, ecstatic. I've pitched my tent in a land of hope. I know he'll never dump me in Hades. I'll never even smell the stench of death. You've got my feet on the life path, with your face shining sun joy all around. Dear friends, let me be completely frank with you. Our ancestor David is dead and buried. His tomb is in plain sight today. But being also a prophet, and knowing that God had solemnly sworn that a descendant of his would rule his kingdom, seeing far ahead, he talked of the resurrection of the Messiah. No trip to Hades, no stench of death. This Jesus God raised up. And every one of us here is a witness to it. Then raised to the heights at the right hand of God, and receiving the promise of the Holy Spirit from the Father, he poured out the Spirit he had just received. That is what you see and hear. For David himself did not ascend to heaven, but he did say, God said to my master, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a stool for resting your feet. Israel, know this. There's no longer room for doubt. God made himself master and Messiah, this Jesus who you killed on a cross. On the evening of the first day of the week, when the disciples were together, with the doors locked for the fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, Peace be with you. After he said this, he showed them his hands and side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again Jesus said, Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. And with that he breathed on them and said, Receive the Holy Spirit. And if you forgive anyone's sins, your sins are forgiven. And if you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven. Jesus appears to Thomas. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, We've seen the Lord. But he said to them, Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, Peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. Thomas said to him, My Lord and my God. Then Jesus told him, Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. The purpose of John's Gospel. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name.
I believe in the resurrection of the body. If you've ever said the Apostles' Creed, then you've said those words. And what is it to be in a body? To be in a body is to be in a place, to be located. To be in my body is for me to be here. There's a great Wendell Berry short story in which some friends all go hunting overnight, and they are slogging through the fields and over through forests and streams with their dogs, and the moon becomes covered up by the clouds, and the dogs run off, and they're sort of out in the middle of, they don't know where, and so they're all begin speculating as to where exactly they are. And finally, Burley Coulter, one of my literary heroes, speaks up and says, well, I know where we are. We're right here. And to be awake in your body is to be here now, to be present, to be alive and in your own skin in a given moment, in a particular place. In John 20, the story we just heard, Jesus is in his body, his resurrected body, and he does this thing, he breathes on the disciples. Anytime someone breathes on someone else in the Bible, which doesn't happen that often, your mind should roam to Genesis 1, where the Eternal breathes onto these handmade figures made of earth and the breath of God, comes onto these creatures, and suddenly they take their first breath. In Hebrew, the word for spirit and breath and wind is all the same, ruach. And there's sort of a unity of the theology there that whatever is breathing has God's breath in it. The Spirit of God is the spirit of life. To be alive is to have God's Spirit in you. In Genesis 1, that connection is there. And then in John 20, when Jesus breathes on the disciples, he's breathing that life spirit on them, but also in this particular way of a commissioning and empowering spirit, because he goes on to remind them that they have the power to forgive or not, to bless or to curse, to bind or free each other in community. And as we all know, in community, we can be buoyed up and strengthened and celebrated, or torn down and laid with heavy burdens and wounded. And we, as the body of Christ, are commissioned to be a beautiful body together. So perhaps it's ironic that today I am recording this video for you to watch while we are not together. We're apart. But I don't think it's irony. I think it's an opportunity, because each one is sheltering in place, our own places, aware that many don't have their own places to live and are struggling. And yet our opportunity in our separation is to, right now, while we are aware of others, we have this opportunity to attend to the place where we are and to our own bodies in it, to relearn our own bodies, to be in our own skin again in that free and amazing way that we were once in our own bodies when we were small children, just floating through the adventure that is the world. At the end of this story, Thomas can't imagine that Jesus is actually present until he reaches out his hand and touches Jesus' body. Jesus was present. Thomas becomes present. And sometimes that's what is needed, some kind of experience, some new moment or thing or person to awaken us again to the reality of ourselves in the moment we're in. And perhaps this Earth Week, Earth Day, can be that for us, that we could become present. It is Earth Week, and in just a few minutes at 1 o'clock, Tracy has been at the center of organizing some incredible events that are kicking off online. If you haven't registered already, I recommend you do so. During this Earth Day, we get to remember that the Earth too is a body. It's a body of beauty and bounty and vulnerability that nourishes and sustains us and every living thing. In Genesis 2, God goes through that process, it seems. After 6 days of creating habitats and filling those spaces and habitats with things and creatures, God rests on the seventh day. And for the last few millennia, Jewish rabbis have been thinking about what this could possibly mean, and wisely they've pointed us to the reality that God doesn't rest because God is just so tired from all that hard work. God rests with a different purpose in mind. The purpose of the seventh day rest is delight, to take stock, to attend and pay attention, to celebrate the beauty of the world and all that is in it. God rests to enjoy and take pleasure in the world that is now in a reality. Just a few verses later, as we have begun now the second creation story in Genesis 2, God places the human, the earth creature, the Adam, made from Adamah, fertile soil, the earthling, in the garden. in a garden to tend and keep it, to attend to the land and care for it, to help flourishing happen in that place. And so there's so much to learn and remember here for us, that as we seek human flourishing rightly, as we pursue justice and offer service and exercise creativity, that we do so in a way that remembers and prioritizes the earth's flourishing. That we orient and scale our work and our play towards the earth and its life, toward putting our bodies in sync with the earth's rhythms, so that we can stay alive and our children can stay alive, and that flourishing can be a mutual enterprise. About 1800 years ago, according to oral tradition, the Osage people became a people about that time along the Ohio River Valley, including here in the Pittsburgh, what's now the Pittsburgh area. And the Osage were a river-based people, but they also developed agriculture and corn growing in particular. And they then moved over some centuries downriver west, as land and animals that were important to them were more plentiful in those directions, until by the time Europeans show up there in Oklahoma and Kansas and out further in those Midwestern states. But here in this area, after the Osage had left some centuries later, the Monongahela people flourished. And for about 600 years, from about 1000 AD until the 17th century, they were building settlements and living along the Monongahela River Valley, including right here. And they disappeared in about 1630 or so. It's unclear as to what happened. Just about that time, of course, the Europeans were beginning to show up in the area. And soon thereafter, other native peoples, the Delaware and the Lenape people, ended up coming into this area because they'd been pushed off the coasts and were coming west inland here, and ended up here. And then various European and native peoples were in this area because of the rivers, and the trade was so good. But what's fascinating across all these different Native American cultures that were here and all over this country is the different but consistent pattern of their lives and taking their shape from the place that they were in, that the peoples would orient their body and the rhythms of their life and work and play around the rhythm of the land, of the place that they were in. And so the ducks in the river, the deer in the forest, the flatland where they could grow corn, the ravine in which they could build their nets and catch fish in the streams, all these places would shape their life and shape, the way that they oriented themselves in time and space, taking their cues from the place in which they found themselves. And so perhaps this COVID-19 socially distanced post-resurrection Earth Day, Earth Week, can be our time to tune our bodies to this place, to the land. Maybe we can relearn the land's beauty and bounty and vulnerability by attending to it, by paying attention. Perhaps even we can learn to want less, need less, have less, use less, waste less, so we can learn the bounty of enough. Perhaps we can dig our hands into the dirt and discover that in fact, our bodies do well here. Perhaps we can become more present to self, to each other, to this place. Perhaps we can learn, as Wendell Berry says, that the earth is satisfyingly large and full of beguiling nooks and crannies. Perhaps we can find ourselves once again, for the first time, at home.
As rain from the clouds will your word come to earth, as snow from the heavens refreshing the land, then soften our soil that the good seed may grow, and ripen rich fruit to return to your hand. We praise you, our God, for the dew of your word. We thank you, good gardener, for your tender toil. We bless you, best farmer, for hundredfold yield, for harvest of grace in our once barren soil. As grain that is scattered, your word has been sown on rocks and on roadways, in good earth and sand. Make fertile our soil that the good seed may grow, and ripen rich fruit to return to your hand. We praise you, our God, for the seed of your word. We thank you, good gardener, for your tender toil. We bless you, best farmer, for hundredfold yield, for harvest of grace in our once barren soil. As rays of the sun shall your word light the world, awaking and warming and healing our land. Then shine in our hearts that the good seed may grow, and ripen rich fruit to return to your hand. We praise you, our God, for the light of your word. We thank you, good gardener, for your tender toil. We bless you, blessed farmer, for hundredfold yield, for harvest of grace in our once barren soil.
May God, who makes all things new, dwell among us and give us life.